We've been working on building tools and devices to help assess people with Parkinson's disease, and largely motor disorders. So it's not only limited to Parkinson's disease, but that's been the main focus. So what we're going to be doing today is I'll give you a bit of an introduction and the background, which I'm sure all of us already perhaps know. We'll talk about the assessment tools and the benefits and the limitations of some of the techniques, the recent developments, and more or less I'll stop at number 4. The data analysis and results are going to be rather mathematical and engineering, and perhaps you're going to be taking me over the time anyway. Looking at Parkinson's disease as the introduction for that one is that it is a loss of the dopamine in the basal ganglia, and because of that, the ability of the body to be optimum control of the motor activity is rather diminished. As a result, people like yourself, many of us who have got the disease, are less able to optimize our motor functions. When we were looking at how do we determine what is the best parameter to measure in order to determine if the person has got the disease, and if so, how do you monitor the progression of the disease, we looked at this as a driving factor. Parkinson's disease, in the healthy basal ganglia, the output is optimized. So we are able to walk without thinking, and again, our gait and everything is optimized for the body size. That becomes difficult for when we are having the disease factor. And the same thing happens for doing other activities as well. As a result of that, some of the symptoms that come across would be classified as bradykinesia, rigidity, gait abnormality, the postural instability and imbalance, speech alterations, tremor, and the micrographia. Micrographia being the smallest of the handwriting at that particular time. And that is all. Most of these can be related down to the loss of habitual activity. So loss of habitual activity as a concept is that when we are not able to optimize our motor activity, that is when we are over-consuming the energy, and there are things which otherwise should not be start happening, like tremor. Implications are that as a result of this particular whole thing, there can be a weakness of our muscles, there can be bradykinesia, there slowness, the posture gets imbalanced, the gait gets impaired, and there's fatigue, because for the same activity which should have been done easily requires extra activity after the disease. So what are the clinical challenges that come up with people in Parkinson's disease? One is that the symptoms vary between people. So no two people have got the same symptoms, and then again, the symptoms can vary over the day. So you can have the sundowner effect, where people may have different symptoms in the evening compared to the morning, or the other way around, the sunriser effect. You could also have the complexity in which the symptoms progress with time. So some person may have some symptoms which start at the early stage of their disease, but may not progress very rapidly, while some other symptoms may. So it is the complexity of the symptoms which makes it sometimes challenging for the clinicians to be able to detect the disease in the first place, and definitely to monitor the progression of the disease. So then, in order to get themselves tested, they need to go for the remote monitoring. They need to go to the clinics, because remote monitoring of these symptoms becomes difficult. And they need the regular, they need to go to the clinicians regularly to make sure that the treatment that they're getting, the medication that they're getting is working for them, the dosage is correct or not. So all of these can sometimes be difficult, and our aim was to try and figure out what can we do to improve some of these. So we looked at some of the assessment tools that were there, and we checked up in literature, and there are many companies that are using IMUs, which are little sensors which you can put in like a watch of a person or a wristband of a person, and they've been used for the purpose of trying to determine whether there is tremor or bradykinesia. EMG, which is the muscle activity, which has also been investigated to see if there are any changes happening because of the disease. Force platforms have been used to determine issues like the gait analysis. So in case if a person comes into the Gait lab, which has got the force platforms and the videos, the person is asked to walk on that, and their gait is carefully assessed to determine if there was a change in the gait. Speech and handwriting are two assessments that have been proposed. So one of them is a thing called the voice diag, which if you see outside at the RMIT stall, you will find that available there. It is to determine what is happening to the speech, and if that is changing, is that a biomarker, and if that can be used to determine the severity of the disease. The handwriting, again, another very important biomarker. Micrographia is one of the factors, but with micrographia has always been the issue, and again with voice has been the issue, that all of us are different. So how do you determine one's handwriting to the other? And so that is where we've been working on. Then there are some other factors which come up and which can be used for this purpose, and one is facial. So when a person, when a neurologist looks at the patient, they're looking at the facial expressions and figuring out if there is any reduction in the ability of the person to be able to express themselves. That is also one factor which goes into as a symptom of the disease. Eye saccadic, to see whether the person is able to move the eyes according to the requirement. And then we discovered the presence of pupillary reflex changes, and this is that our steady pupil changes continuously, and that change corresponds to the disease or not. We also had a look at the gait, and we found that there was a change in the gait variability, and we were looking at the difficulty in the initiation of the gait, and we were also looking at the freezing of the gait. So all of these are factors which are used in clinics, and we were looking at how can technology help in monitoring these. Now, for measuring the symptoms of PD, gait and posture and muscle activity and video assessments are some of the methods that have been used and reported in clinics. Again, posture and balance are again two things which have been considered for this purpose. Handwriting, as I mentioned earlier, the image of the handwriting has been considered in the past, but nowadays with availability of smartphones and digital tablets, it's easy to be able to do it on the tablet, and rather than just looking at the shape of the handwriting, it is actually the gestures used for the writing which we found to be much more important. Speech. One of the factors comes down to in speech is that all of us speak differently, and on top of that, some of us may come from non-English speaking backgrounds. Again, so the language could be a barrier. So we were trying to determine, are there ways of overcoming these barriers? And again, the ability for the person to be able to read or listen to could again be an impairment. So we were looking at other alternate ways of dealing with the situation. And then we were looking at the tremor and determining whether we can use accelerometers and gyroscopes for this purpose, or are there any other better alternates? We were looking at the facial and eye features, and so we were looking at at how do we respond to a facial stimuli when a person is asked to, for example, smile or speak something. We were looking at the pupil diameters and looking at how do they react in a steady state situation differently because of the disease. And again, the eye gaze. So how do I follow the movement of a light pattern, typical, at a distance to see whether I am being able to track it down, or I'm overshooting or undershooting. So one of the things which we looked at was, now what you see in this picture is a person who is wearing an IMU. You see those, do I have, no. You can see on the wrist and the shoulder or the upper arm, you can see these little black pieces of equipment, which are the IMUs, which we use to determine if there were any significant changes happening because of the presence of tremor and bradykinesia, and whether we could relate it also to the level of the tremor, so that we wanted to be able to determine if the person whom we were looking at had either essential tremor or Parkinson's disease, because many of them can have very similar symptoms, but their treatment could be very different. We were now in that, one of the good things about using a device like the IMUs on the thing is it's very easy to do and put, but what we found was that it lacks sensitivity and specificity. So because if we were to just put these sensors onto the person and tell them to spend the day with that, we got results where the results were a mixed bag, and people, when they were doing the normal activity, it might reflect as a tremor when there was none, or they were fatigued, and it would reflect as bradykinesia. Now, so we then looked at, can we make it task specific rather than look at it all the time? Look at it only during the time when a person was doing an activity. So what you saw in the previous slide was that the person is drawing a spiral, and we were looking at the IMU data only at that particular time. We then looked at speech and voice assessment, and we were looking at, can we use it using a smartphone, and we found that we could, because that makes it easier so that you do not need specialized equipment for that purpose. Again, we had to repeat the test to determine, because each of us speak differently, and our voices change not only because of the disease, but because of many other factors. So were we able to differentiate between all of those conditions? We were also looking at how the UPDRS score relates to the voice, because it's been reported in literature that it does, but we wanted to test that, and also determine whether we can identify whether the person was in the on state or the off state. That is, whether they have had the medication which is functional for them or not. And because what we were hoping to be able to achieve with that is that if a person was to be taking this for the remote monitoring from their own houses, the doctor could determine whether the dosage of the medication was correct. Again, there were considerations that we wanted to see whether the cultural aspects were playing any role in it, whether the demographic aspects were playing any role in it, and then again, eyesight and hearing, etc., were to be considered. So we came up with this tool called the Voice Diag, and this is a software-based device which determines, so we use lots of different features. It is an AI-based device which differentiates between the off state and the on state. We tested it approximately on about 400 people, I think 480 from memory. And currently clinical trials are happening. In case of many of you might have been already invited to the place by my colleague to do a test. If you have, thank you. And if you haven't, if you wish to, please do it. So what are we doing in this? Technically, we identify certain features which are related to the voice. Instead of using language, we are using three sounds, R, O, and N. The reason R comes without any movement of the mouth. O is at the back of the mouth, and N is nasal. So we're covering three aspects of sound production. And we did that, and we were able to come up with rather good results. So, and we also used it to determine the level of hoarseness, because what our clinical friends told us that they would not just be looking at whether the person's got Parkinson's disease or not, but whether they had hoarseness, and if that, which is what a speech pathologist would be telling them, and if so, if it was present, low, medium, or high. The second thing we were looking at is whether we can have a look at the facial expressions of the person. And in that situation, we were looking at the people's face in response to a command like a smile and a kiss. And these were the two most useful stimuli that we gave, where we could differentiate between people with the disease or without the disease, or more importantly, not just disease. We were looking at the hypomia, which is one of the major symptoms of the disease, so that in the early stages, when a person who is not very, who doesn't know their patient very well, who's coming, when the patient might have come for the first time, the equipment, this particular little software, can determine for them, can assist them, determine if this patient may have hypomia, which is to later on, of course, when the doctor knows the patients well, then they can use the same thing to be able to monitor whether the patient is responding to the treatment or whether things are not going as they should. In this particular study, so we got the results with a specificity of 0.72 and accuracy of 0.83, which is for a system like this, which is a smartphone-based system, which can be taken away by the patient to their own homes, or can be used in a remote community anywhere in the world. It is what we believe extremely good. And again, tests of this are ongoing right now, and if any of you are willing to, please drop into the RMIT stall outside, where we'll be, it just takes 30 seconds for the test. The handwriting analysis is, again, something which perhaps many of us are familiar with, and this is the drawing of the spiral is a routine test which is done in clinics, but we are not doing it based upon on a piece of paper or the shape. What we are doing it is based upon the dynamics and something which can be done on a smartphone, so that it can be done routinely to determine if there was a change in the bradykinesia, in the rigidity from morning to evening, in case if the medication was working. And it is something which is a very simple little test, takes 30 seconds to do, gives information to the neurologist, and keeps a record over time on how the patient has progressed, so that there is no confusion, so that in case if one doctor is not available, if there's another doctor to be seen tomorrow, the other person can see the history very quickly and easily. And again, it can also be seen, is available for anyone in any part of the world, so that it is remote. And yes, for this, we have already received the approval from the TGA, so that it is available right now to be used. So handwriting analysis, again, going back, it is also another particular aspect, goodness about this is that it corresponds pretty closely with the UPDRS. So it gives us also a number corresponding to the bradykinesia, rigidity, and tremor scores. And so the report contains all of that and an estimate of the UPDRS. Of course, the estimate of the UPDRS is only an estimate, but it is to as a first step for the clinician to be able to see how the patient is going, to be able to monitor them. One of the limitations so far has been that it still requires a digital tablet. Now we are currently testing it on a smartphone, which would make it more convenient, but currently, as we have it right now, it is on a digital tablet. And yes, this is something which, where we need the patient to actively do it. So we were at one time, which we've stopped now, we're looking at whether we can also test people when, even if the patient does not want to participate, but we decided that we stopped that because we learned later that that was not according to the ethics. However, there is a purpose for that, but some people wanted it that way, but we now know that that is unethical, and so we stopped that. And in case if someone wants to know how we were doing it by looking into the eye of the person, and that we can do without really telling the person that we are looking at the eye of the person. So now the software of that has been again tested for about 400 people. It is currently, as I mentioned earlier, approved by the TGA, and we are also looking at whether we can use this for cognitive impairment detection. In other words, can we score it against the MoCA? Now, while that has not been the focus of our work, but that was a serendipitous, and we are currently looking at that. The other factors we've been looking at is ophthalmology. Now, this is something which is relatively new and recent. That as I mentioned to you, the pupillary reflex is something which is relatively recent discovery, and it is something which is autonomic, which means that yes, one is of course that even if the patient doesn't want to participate, we can still do it, but that's not the only reason. Another factor is that it corresponds to a different aspect of the disease, and so neuroscientists would like to know more about it, because that will tell them the relationship of what is happening at the eye and the basal ganglia, and this is a work in progress. Another aspect we've been looking at is the eye saccadic. Now this is that it's a simple little tool where on the laptop we have a red dot which we move, and the person follows the red dot, and we are simply able to monitor that to determine whether we were able to identify any overshoots or undershoots, and those correspond to certain disease conditions. Again, for the facial benefits, it is that it makes it more real. It makes it similar to how a neurologist looks at their patients. So we're looking at it not just as a device viewpoint, but more as customized to the neurologist, so that they can, and so we can pick up nuances which the neurologist picks up. And this is again in the early stages of the development. So a comparative between what all are the different techniques. Voice protocol, this is the easiest to record. And any smartphone, even in reasonably noisy situations, would work. So what we found is that yesterday evening when we took the recordings, now that was very noisy. But in a time like today, it is very convenient to record it, and it takes literally 30 seconds. It can be done on any inexpensive smartphone, simple and easy. And the second one, and it can be done repeatedly by the same throughout the day, so that we'd come to know if the symptoms are progressing during the day. Hand sketching. Now, this is currently being done on a tablet, though we are trying it on the smartphone. Now, again, this is simple and easy to do. Handwriting does correspond well with the UPDRS as well as the bradykinesian rigidity. Speech, as different from the voice, but it includes the complexity, because you are now talking about a language, you're now talking about the actual reading of some text, which again has its own nuances and challenges. It does give extra information, but again, automating it is not that simple, and so for the moment, we have dropped it. Muscle activity. Now, this was a very interesting aspect that we've been looking at, and that is, how do the muscles behave for the same activity because of the disease? And I think in the next couple of slides, I'll tell you more about it, but it is about things like the weakness in the leg and the ankle joint. And often, I think many of us sitting out here might be from physiotherapy, and often they would be training their patients to be able to have a stronger muscle contraction to increase the strength of the ankle. Our research seems to not agree with that. We seem to think that already people with Parkinson's disease are overdoing their contraction. They are contracting both the muscles across the ankle, which means that it is not increasing the strength of the contraction, which will improve the joint action, but it will be that if we can manage the contraction a bit better, so relax one and increase the other, that would work better. And that is something which we are now currently experimenting with to be able to see whether that can improve the gait of people. But in case of any partners or people interested, we'd love to discuss this. Upper limb actions, again, now this is the one which you saw in the photograph. This is an IMU, and there are a number of commercial devices are also available in this. We find that this is good if the protocol is highly managed. Otherwise, it is, and then again you need another device. Well, nowadays smart watches like the ones from Apple and Huawei work. However, there are limitations. So we would, while this has been one of the most popular tools so far, we believe that there are limitations, and you should consider that before you get into it. Now, if you consider, I think we've already spoken about the 6 and the 7 together. Looking at, again, the benefits and the limitations, I think I already mentioned that in the previous one, but I've tabulated it here, that in the voice, issues come like the cultural, the linguistic, gender. We have, in our research, I believe that we've overcome the issues of the gender differences, but we've not considered the other ones fully. We have considered some, but not completely. For handwriting, again, as I mentioned, digital tablet is still required. The IMUs, if we use the clinical IMUs, these can be expensive, and the watches, the smart watches, have got lots of limitations on the quality of the data, the accuracy, etc. So I would be highly mindful of that. And facial and eye expressions is that it is still in an early stage of work, not only our lab, but I think across the world. So this is one of the reports which we did a few years ago. One of my colleagues, Poonam, who did some excellent work. And I think one of you perhaps might be in this news item itself. It was covered across the country. So I was going to tell Olivia that across lots of other exciting news items that you've done, we've also got lots of news coverage ourselves. So we might want to add to your list of news coverages. Again, the gait and posture assessment has got lots of benefits because it is something which is suitable, which gives you a very good result and adds on to the UPDRS. Not only does it give you the factors related to the gait, but it also talks about, it also helps the clinician get a good assessment of the bradykinesia and rigidity. However, the limitations is that you require specialized sensors, you require equipment, and currently you need personnel because it is not fully automated. Smartphone sensors have been proposed, but they have a high level of error. Reduced sensitivity and specificity means that the response can be incorrect, which is not a good idea. And limited assessment, what happens to the effect of medication is not known. So again, describing the gait analysis, what I mentioned in the previous slide. The EMG of gait analysis has been a useful measure. Again, it is not something which is meant for taking away home and doing the assessment. However, in the research area, it does help in telling us that before a physiotherapist was to tell the patient to just go and exercise and increase the muscle strength, there are some other things that they should consider. And one of them is the relationship between the agnostic and the antagnostic muscles at the ankle. And these are the two muscles which are pulling and pushing across at the ankle. So what do we take away from here? One is that the regular monitoring of their disease can be possible using the voice diag, the handwriting diag, and the vid diag. These are available on the smartphone. And I would request you to have a look at the devices outside. And we are now in the process of combining all of the three together to make it into something called the motor diag, which I think I speak about in the next slide. Yep. Now, the reason is that because not everyone has the same symptoms all the time. So by putting it together, we are able to get a more accurate description of the disease and the symptoms. It is again there to assist the neurologist. It is not designed at the moment, at least, for giving it to in the report to the patient, but the report goes to the neurologist, who then determines whether, number one, it could be just an accidental report, so we are going to make sure that that is correct, and then what kind of a treatment option is required. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the sundowner effect and the sunrise effect and other such phenomena, which we do not really fully understand because we do not have the devices and the equipment, can now be determined, and the effect of the medication can be determined. Now, or in fact, treatments, like for example, there's a stall outside which I saw, which are using lasers to be helping it. So to be able to determine that whether that is functioning, and it's functioning for the patient, because it's not going to function for everyone. So to make sure that the right patient is getting the benefits. I think I've repeated myself on this, that if I can increase the coactivation and if I can reduce the coactivation or manage the coactivation, then I might be able to help the people with Parkinson's disease increase their strength at the ankle without causing them fatigue. In the future, we are looking for partners, all kinds. We're looking for people with the disease to be able to tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. We are looking for clinicians to be able to tell us whether they think that this is usable. And we are looking for industry to see whether this can actually be translated to be taken away and be used in the clinics. I will not, I'll skip the data analysis part and keep it for the questions. Thank you.